Hey guys, my name is Devesh Khanal. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GrowthRock, a conversion optimization company. And in this presentation, I want to talk about a framework we've built running hundreds and hundreds of A/B tests we call usability versus desirability. This helps us understand different A/B test hypotheses and how web UX works so that we can better understand what tests are likely to win and also what happened when certain tests don't win, show no difference, or do win, so we can understand what happened and the context of them better. In addition to this CRO agency of GrowthRock, we also have a conversion drop alert application that we're about to release for brands that are doing enough volume to where knowing about conversion rate drops that happen as soon as possible is really valuable. Our app tells you that on a day-by-day basis and provides data when a drop does happen that can help you understand where on the site that came from so you can fix it and save your revenue as much as possible and as quickly as possible. So let's start by understanding this framework of usability and desirability. Okay, we think that this is how you can think of two aspects of any kind of front-end UI, UX type change. On the one hand, you have usability. So in usability, we consider when you want a user to do something, get from point A to point B. So a lot of our work and the work we're going to talk about here is around e-commerce, and that's what our agency specializes in. It's a transaction that you want to happen. Add to cart, checkout, right? And there's barriers. Let's symbolize it with one barrier to the customer actually executing on that transaction. Usability, the way you can visualize it, is reducing that barrier, right? So there's some desire to get from here to here. We're just going to reduce some of the barrier and friction. And I'm going to show some examples of that. But that's tweaking and changing the web UX to reduce the barrier so it's easier to get from point A to point B. Versus in desirability, it's increasing the willingness to cross the barrier regardless of how many barriers exist. So in this case, even if the website is super clunky and kludgy to use, desirability would be presenting the products, etc., in a certain way that helps more users say, I want this and I will deal with whatever friction there is on the website. So two different aspects of the same goal, which is increasing the percent of people getting from point A to point B. And that's conversion rate, right? Conversion rate optimization. So usability ideas, I feel like in general, are more common and are more thought about, heard of, and written about in blog posts throughout the web, right? So your stereotypical A/B tests fall into this bucket, a lot of them. This kind of changing button colors, which to be frank, 99% of the time you do this, it's not going to make any difference, but people love to talk about it. That's a classic usability thing, right? It doesn't change the desire to check out, but it perhaps increases the percentage of people that see a button that'll help them get to the checkout place. Other things are CTA placement. People love in the UI and A/B test world and sphere to talk about above the fold, above the fold. We put the CTA above the fold and increase conversion rate by about this much. That's a classic usability thing. Again, it doesn't increase the desire to check out. It just increases the percentage of people that notice that there's a next action to take here, right? Because less people see it if it's below the fold. And similarly, form tests, changing the number of forms, etc., are typically very usability heavy type tests. On the other hand, desirability tests, as I said, increase the desire to check out regardless of if the web UX is, high friction or low friction. So they require more user understanding. So using some examples, headlines and descriptions. Headlines and descriptions can change how a product is perceived. So even if the actual web UI is the same, let's say there's a terrible cart experience, you can't find buttons, things are below the fold or what have you, if you increase with certain value propositions or pricing, right, or imagery that gives the brand and the product a certain feel, you can increase the desire of the customer to check out regardless of whether your site has friction. Okay. One thing I want to say is it's not one or the other. So there are certain aspects of a given UI change that you're going to do that could have flavors of usability and desirability, but it's a good framework to think of. So you should think of it as having two axes. So as an example, right, reducing form fields and reducing clicks is usability. Thinking of it as two axes is really just the title. And then desirability would be changing the value proposition, products, and pricing, as I mentioned. But there's also things that fall in between. So a large site redesign could have all sorts of changes, some of which are imagery and creative and value proposition testing, right? And other things are simply just placement and usability things. So it could have both. And then new navigation, for example, and we'll talk about a few navigation case studies in a little bit, also sometimes have a mix of both. Because on the one hand, navigation is also the ease at which you can find things and go where you want to go. That's usability. But depending on what products in, for example, a multiple SKU e-commerce store, you're highlighting and mentioning the names of certain links that you put in navigation can change the perceived value and the perception of it. And that's desirability. Okay. So a very general statement is that in our experience, tests that affect desirability tend to move the needle more. As you'll learn in this entire, in the CRO world, everybody who does CRO enough says there are exceptions to every rule. And this is also part of that. So, of course, there are examples of usability moving the needle a lot. We are going to show you some that our team has done. But in general, we feel like if you're owning a website, a store, managing it, or doing agency work for a client that manages it, if you can really home in on what issues affect the desirability of the customer to want to get from point A to B, to want to check out, you should prioritize those. Because here's why. Most websites, especially newer ones, have basic themes and usability taken care of, right? And you take e-commerce as an example. Again, that's our forte at the moment in our specialty, although we've worked on a variety of sites. Most consumers know where the next steps happen, right? The vast majority of e-commerce sites you go to now, you know that there's sort of a photo on the left side, product description, and add to cart is kind of expected here. You can find that button. So where if you make the add to cart button sticky as you scroll down a long product page, could that increase conversion rate? For sure. We've tested this, right? And sometimes it does. But in general, if you can figure out how to position the product versus competition better, in our experience, that tends to move the needle more. But it's harder to do. So let's look at a few examples, okay? So in our mind, pretty deep on the desirability angle is pricing. Pricing affects everything because most products, if you offered it free, you could see a massive conversion rate increase, right? Because everyone's judging in their mind, do I desire this product enough to pay X dollars for it? We think most brands don't test pricing enough. They're scared to, they don't know how to, etc. Right? So an example is for a consumer electronics brand, what we did is we took two categories. So use this example to perhaps inspire similar tests as yours. And apologies that my face and video is covering half of the conversion rate graph. And we took two categories and temporarily reduced the price. So this is actually a sequential test. It's not a pure A/B test, right? Most brands do not want to A/B test pricing because they don't want a given consumer or multiple consumers at a given time to be able to purchase the products at the same at a different price. They feel that's not honest, etc. And so we said, okay, let's just do this sequentially. We've had a ton of data at the current price, which was $30 price point for consumer accessories, consumer electronic accessories. And we dropped for two popular categories, we dropped it for a few weeks to $19. So expectedly, conversion rate saw a decent increase. And then also expectedly, AOV saw a decrease for people who visited those product pages. But that proportional increase in conversion rate and decrease in AOV did not exactly offset. And fortunately for the brand and for us, the increase in conversion rate outdid the drop in AOV. And so in that case, you got the main metric that any CRO program is meant to increase, revenue per visitor, in a transactional website like e-commerce, went up, right? Because there was a higher conversion rate increase and a decrease in AOV. This is pure desirability. Have you found the price that maximizes the revenue per visitor. We're not changing the usability of the site at all. It could be that the checkout flow is terrible, and it's still terrible, right? But we change the price, and it increases the desire of people wanting to buy at that price. So this is something highly recommend most sites do and test. Okay. On another hand, this was a women's apparel store. We tested the perceived price and value. So this was the presentation of price, specifically in somewhere along the checkout flow in certain parts of the cart. What we did was the control had simply the actual price you're going to purchase it for. There was no mention of the strikeout price, the was price, right? It just had now. And on the PDP and the listing pages, it did have a was price. So we tested first, just adding that. And then we did a slight modification, so this is desirability. It doesn't change the usability of the site, the checkout button, view cart. You can still sort of proceed through and use the site in the same way. But just the existence of, hey, this was $74, so you saved $22, changes the desire. The hypothesis is that this changes the desire of purchasing the product. It gives it higher perceived value, right? And then, as a second variation, we just did a simple usability tweak and actually tested color in this case. Because we said, hey, this is the normal palette. Can we add a strikingly different green to draw attention to it? This is pure. This is like the button color test, etc. I told you I would be honest and show usability tests that won. Lo and behold, this had no statistical difference. Technically, it did end up with a slightly higher conversion rate, but without statistical significance. And this had an 8.5% increase with 99% significance. So big difference in usability. This is an example of usability and desirability on those two axes interacting. So you needed both to receive this. You need to first have the desirability aspect. In other words, actually mention the was price and how much they saved. That's desirability. And then two, there was a usability tweak that brought attention to it and people noticed it. Or maybe green was perceived as positive, etc. Right? So that's really interesting. Similarly, on a similar site, actually on that very site, there was a user base that was plus-sized women. And for them, there was this value proposition of having certain things be cup-sized, right? So we're blanketing out the actual photos, and it actually was not lingerie or underwear. So, of course, all bras come in cup-size. It was other apparel, some of which came in cup-sized. And that was actually a unique value proposition of this store. The majority of these women's tops, normally in most stores that you would get it, don't come with cup size, just extra small, medium, large, extra large. For the plus size women, that is bad. It's a bad experience. And they're craving and they wanted to be able to choose these tops with bra sizing available. So the hypothesis there was, that's a big deal. Let's call it out on the category page and show that we have that value proposition. Simply adding these simple badges saying, hey, these come in cup size options. That has that size availability. That feature is there. Increased conversion rate from the category pages by 4%, 99% significance. Again, this is pretty far in the desirability side of the usability desirability spectrum, because you could argue, of course, there's some usability, like you don't have to go into each PDP and open it up to see what the sizing is. But largely, this is a presentation of a value proposition that previously most users were unaware of, or some fraction of them were unaware of, right? And so it's heavy on desirability. The actual UI change is trivial. It's a tiny badge, right? And this is a schematic we did to anonymize the client. The actual relative size compared to the image was much smaller, right? And so the actual change was small. But knowing that this is a pain point is critical. And that's what I said earlier, that desirability is not easy. These aren't tests that make for easy blog posts with these little snippets. Hey, everyone in e-commerce, do this thing with your add to cart button. Right? That's a little bite-sized nugget that anyone can use. We tested a red color here. It worked really well. This is specific. If you don't have, the customer base, if another women's apparel site does not have a sizable amount of plus-size women, then this is not going to be an issue. And you're probably not going to see conversion rate issues. Similarly, if you're selling consumer electronics, if you're selling boat parts, if you're selling furniture, if you're selling supplements, if you're selling soup, online or food products, you're going to have different things that people want that increase the desire to buy it. Why are they buying? What unique thing do you have to offer in the marketplace? So this isn't easily translatable. The concept is translatable, which is you should probably think about mentioning these unique value propositions, but the value propositions themselves are for sure store specific, and they require some effort, some work, some customer understanding to know, to learn. Okay. Now let's move a little bit. Those are some examples of desirability, from really hard to execute or heavy ones to maybe slightly easier, etc. Um, there's some examples also in the mix, in the spectrum, moving towards the usability side now. In particular, we notice for a lot of sites, the mobile product pages, if you have long product pages, can become really blocks of text. So on a phone screen, you just see text and text. And whereas on desktop, maybe there's text on one side and an image on another. When it's responsive and collapses, you just see walls of text. And we noticed on Hotjar recordings that in certain clients, users were not making it past certain parts of this mobile PDP because it was just too much text. Okay. And so we've tested reducing some of that text, turning it into scannable bullets, reducing that amount. In certain instances, for example, here we have seen conversion increases. Okay. In certain other instances, we have not. Right. And so again, everything has an exception. Our hypothesis is that for certain brands where there's an ethos of reading a lot of information, right? Perhaps the brand came from a culture of blogging, etc. Then the customers are used to that. They expect it, they want it, and that's fine. They'll do it on mobile. And for other brands where they're maybe opening a bunch of tabs, there's a lot of competitors, it's not a very well differentiated marketplace. They don't want to have to read tons of text. Okay. Um, so continuing along that path, mobile navigation, we've also seen certain examples here where on the original, and apologies, on the original, actually, there was no buttons here. Normally, there's a hamburger menu where all of the links, the navigation links exist, and we added these clickable buttons to categories. We've done this on multiple sites, and this increases the percentage of people, of course, getting to those category pages. And we've actually seen an increase in actual mobile orders from the homepage. Another example here for a soup store, normally you'd have to access the flavors of the soup. So this one's accurate. Apologies for the previous error. The inside the hamburger menus where you would see all the categories, but in this case, we just showed the main most popular flavors right across the top. Okay. And then finally, I wanted to mention something that is kind of right in the middle there between usability and desirability, which is upsells. We think for most e-commerce and any web business where this is applicable, upsells are a for sure must test. And specifically for upsells, it's both usability and desirability in the sense that there is a usability aspect of, look, most of these products exist and you could find them on the particular site. You could find them, but presenting them in certain places, it makes the usability a lot easier, right? So it's a lot easier if you find a sister product and you could just click one click plus and I add it on, right? Is easier. But at the same time, there's a desirability aspect, which is presenting it at the right time could perhaps increase the desire to check it out. So we find this, and this is showing a generic apparel example, again, to anonymize our clients. But I'll give you some examples. So some famous brands, not our clients. For example, the online razor subscription, so Harry's Razors, Dollar Shave Club, etc. That's an example of a place where the main product, you buy a razor, has a lot of very obvious kind of complementary products. Do you need cream with it? Do you need a brush? Do you need the cartridges, right? So in those aspects, you buy the main product. There's a desirability thing, which is if you just go to a shaving cream PDP, perhaps it's not as appropriate, or you're not thinking about buying it as much as if you first buy a razor. Okay, I need some cream to go with it, right? And so, but at the same time, it's also usability because just presenting it in the right place. So upsells, we think for sure, test it in the cart, test it on your add to cart slider or mode hole, and see what the results are. So that's it. I hope this was really useful. Again, we have both the conversion optimization service and an app coming. You can sign up and learn more. We publish case studies and articles like this all the time at growthrock.co/articles. If you have any specific questions, you can email me directly, davish@growthrock.co. Thanks.